who simply ask questions.
Is that what is? This is a big question for me. I study philosophy of education. I can't tell if Socrates is horizontal. I don't know what horizontal means really, and I can't tell. I get kind of weird vibes from Socrates. I get weird vibes from him. I'm going to be open about that.
There's some other language used that maybe could work with also like youth-adult partnerships, and there's all these other things that have been written about that, where it's not just the teachers up here, the students down here, but it's the idea that those relationships can change. And sometimes, as students, whatever age you are, you have the answers, and the teacher or facilitator doesn't. But it's the idea that it's a working together and working together to figure out how to work together.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Recognizing the sort of adult-child dynamic that we're talking about as an oversimplification. And going from there, seeing what you find.
On the subject of oversimplification, the idea that good education is small class size, is to me an oxymoron. Because some of the best education is when you have a super teacher and you've got hundreds of students. But you can have a bad teacher and 5 students, and you're in deep trouble. So, I think there's a qualitative thing we've got to never forget. I keep asking the question, what is the purpose of education? And I would argue that some of what's gone on in the last few years, the purpose of education is to give high-end people in the education sector careers. The cost of education is ludicrous relative to, something that's going, education itself is not way better now than it cost 10 times as much 20 years ago. So simplification scares me.
Please.
I agree with some of what you said. Qualitatively, yes, it's important. I teach in high schools. I also teach in CUNY, and my CUNY classes are larger, but they're quiet. My high school classes are 30 kids, and I spend a third of the time in the period trying to keep it quiet and coming away. So I'm not disagreeing. We're in the middle of a so-called reform revolution right now. The people who are leading it, the 1% of America, tell us it's about the children. They could care less about the children, it's about money, and we are at the receiving end of that. I went to 3 days of Danielson rubric training. Charlotte Danielson was supposedly an expert in pedagogy. She works at Princeton and she had a lot to offer. But what the reform movement did, they co-opted some of her ideas, created 21 components that we're rated on. They come into the classroom, they don't even say hello. They're looking down and they're typing, looking for evidence of certain components. That's the reality of teaching now in this city. And I think it's nationwide. And it's being driven by money. And sadly, the qualitative teacher has to work to a template. They don't want humor. They don't want the soft shoe shuffle. I'm sure you can do it. Looking at a big personality. And I think what we're facing now is the hedge fund crowd. Harvey, obviously, over here can speak more eloquently, have abandoned the real estate bubble and are now in education. And when they've raped education, they'll move on to something else. And I think that largely is what we're feeling. I think we agree.
Did you see the documentary, I think it was Dan Rather, going to Finland? Finland's students rate highest in these tests in science, math, history, and everything. And he interviewed the teachers there. They have no standardized tests. There's no set curriculum. The teachers work with the students as the teachers feel best, and the students rate higher, much higher than ours.
I come from a system which had standardized tests, the English system. And I giggle a little bit because I'm married to a Jamaican woman who grew up in Jamaica. She and I took the same tests, the so-called Oxford and Cambridge and the A-level and the But what was, I think, exciting was that teachers were not teaching us for the exams, specifically, it wasn't coaching to get through a grade. You needed to be taught stuff. And there was a deep commitment to, do you understand it? Can you use it?
Okay, so may I ask the question, nostalgia aside, so then the issue is not whether the teaching process is qualitative or quantitative, but how perhaps quantitative processes are utilized by bureaucracies and other big bad shadowy organizations, or whatever, how they're utilized by systems. Is that what's the issue? That quantitative teaching processes and learning processes is not actually a problem. I ask you that.
And maybe before pause, just as a facilitation, one way to think about what's political about how we teach. We're in an I think we've built together right now an educational little thing. I don't know what happens, but it does. And we want to make sure that people who would want to say something, who might not feel comfortable saying something, based on all kinds of identity politics that we deal with. These are all in the classroom. These are all in educational situations. And I mean, one way that Occupy deals with this is a stack. I'd propose, I suppose, as a facilitator, if you'd like to say something, just raise your hand and I'll put you on the stack and organize it that way as we continue forward. How does everyone feel about that? Temperature check? Anyone gonna leave our classroom if that goes down? Okay, great. So we'll start here and then just raise your hand.
I just wanted to respond to the comment about the size of the classroom, and I understand that we don't want to reduce the quality of teaching to the number of students being taught, but there are structural constraints, I think, to teaching to hundreds of people, and I know that as distance learning becomes very popular, there's a temptation to think that a great teacher can teach this way, but you're limiting, in most cases, the teaching style to lecturing, and the danger and the downside is basically replicating and amplifying the status quo in many respects. And so while some exceptions to the rule have figured out ways to engage in a participatory way, really large classrooms, I mean, I think we need to recognize the constraints of teaching to hundreds.
Okay. Say again? Who's up?
Can I go on this one?
Sure, all right. And if you would like, share a name, your name, some other name. So, if there's no one else, go.
Oh, I'm Peter Burgess, and you know, at my age, there's nothing I have except nostalgia. So if it appears to be nostalgia, but you know, I went through some fantastic lectures with a lot before the internet was invented. But I also had the ability to have some time one-on-one with somebody who had a real brain, who didn't, you know, wasn't just regurgitating stuff. And somehow you've got to get the best of both. I would also comment that, you know, in the system sort of I grew up with, there were almost no administrators. The teachers were the school. You did not have a principal's office with 30 people, you know, doing the paperwork. My dad was the headmaster of a fairly large school. He had a secretary. That was it. That was the administration of the school. Yeah. And, you know, I think that we just got completely out of kilter in terms of how many people are in the overhead of the education system.
Please go ahead. I'll put you on stack. We've got now. I'm gonna get real with y'all. We've got some white men talking. I'm a white man also. Just wanted to call that out. That's totally fine. Go ahead. just wanted to recognize. We'll bring it into the room. That I think again. If for those of us who are joining us, yes. We're Horizontal Pedagogy. We're running a workshop from 10 to 3 all day here at the Free University. We're asking questions about what's political about how we teach, what's political about how we learn, We're going to try and follow a rough schedule of different questions every hour. We're still in this particular discussion about what is political about how we teach, how we learn. We've got this list of questions here. I'm taking a stack, and we're in the midst of a discussion about these things. So if you have a question or a comment, just raise your hand, get my attention, I'll put you on.
Okay,
Go ahead, sir.
My name's Sean Doyle. I agree with, well, Peter's a little older than me, I think. He remembers the time when teaching was a profession. He talks about the administrators left them alone. Well, it is a profession. It takes longer to get a permanent license to teach high school in New York than it does to become a lawyer. That's a fact. I did probation. We were observed all the time. It never ended. It was terrifying. A beginning teacher is a very difficult process wherever you do it. But we used to have this cozy debate in New York, and I'm sure you did where you come from, Peter. I lived in Wolverhampton for many years, by the way, from Ireland originally. And it was if teaching is an art or a science. Now I mentioned the soft shoe shuffle earlier on. I'm a soft shoe shuffle technician. I use anecdotes. I became a teacher at 42, so I bring a lot of my stories into the classroom. And it was a nice debate because a better technician you could learn from, and hopefully they can learn from you. But sadly, we don't have that discussion anymore because it's a business. And the nostalgia you enjoy, and I enjoy listening to it when we were treated as professionals, has been replaced with a sleight of hand that suggests the teacher is the most important vehicle in a child's progress, but they don't mean it. What they mean is they're going to create a template, the Charlotte Danielson rubric, one of many, and they're going to measure us. You can't measure teaching, but they're doing it now. And that's getting in the way, and that's a political reality, to answer the question. And we're finding it very difficult to get beyond that. The morality, I teach in John Dewey High School in Coney Island, some of you might know it. John Dewey was a great philosopher and a great intellectual. And what we were doing at my school until the bureaucrats took over, they should have bottled it and exported it. We had a mellow learning environment, and the central idea of Dewey was that everybody could learn at their own pace. I remember in school, I did the 11 plus in England. We moved from Ireland to England when I was 10. I did the 11 plus, it was a standardised test. You either went to university, you were one of the 2% in England, or you went in the factory. That's the way it was. It was a tracking.
We had a factory to go into.
But we had a factory to go into, and that's what Tony Benn talks about, the skill that you referred to earlier on that was part of the vocation. I'm losing my point now, but I'll let somebody else.
We've got this gentleman here, and then this nice lady here. Anyone else wants to jump in, just make eye contact.
My name's Mike, and it seems with education, it's always a question of who knows the information to start off with, so you can bring people up to speed. And I think that increasingly in a technological world, most people are dealing with magic all the time. Their phone is magic, engineering is magic, because they don't understand these basic principles. And it takes a very specialized person to understand these things. And so even with my kids going to high school, the politics that they're taught are out of a book that came out of the vetting process in Texas. And so that they definitely toe the line. And the kids can't question it because first the download has to start. First everybody has to get up to speed with what they're supposed to know. I value that, but I think that when we're talking about using the internet to teach people on a broader spectrum, maybe that's the prerequisite. First you have to learn the facts, and then you go into a classroom with a little bit of background, and then you can start opening up and talking about what you do with these facts.
And your name, whichever.
My name is Maliha, and I teach the Radical Economics 101 in Occupy University. And so my question is a lot more about the pedagogy of Occupy University and kind of what people want and think about that. One thing that I noticed is when we were doing those classes in the fall, the conversation was sort of building week to week with occupiers, at least 50-50, right? We're occupiers and then people passing by in Zapati Square. And now we've been doing them again in Union Square, but of course the turnout has been low this last month, and so I'm finding myself wondering, what's the kind of economics that's useful, and how do we run Occupy University classes, and how are we going to structure this to be the most useful education for everyone who's coming to things like this? So that's my question.
Question for someone from OCU. Anyone from Occupy University feel like fielding that one? I could put myself on stack. Yeah, all right, I'll put myself on stack. I'm Dave. So Malih, I heard in your question that, so you're teaching the, is it the radical or the popular economics?
They're the same.
They're the same now. Okay. So I'll bring everyone up to date. This is good. We'll do a little public service announcement.
Yeah.
Occupy University did a launch on March 1st with 3 classes that were pilot classes. One of them is the Horizontal Pedagogy workshop. It's been meeting actually in some form since the middle of December. The second course was a Studying May Day course that was an 8-week lecture course that met every week up until today. And then the third course was going to be this radical economics class, which started just a few weeks ago. Today we're launching a series of other classes that are all on these flyers here. There's a class on radical critical walking, like a kind of taught by a geographer from town. We're going to be doing occupied algebra. We're launching that here today at 12:30 if you want to learn some math for the 99%. And we're doing politics and poetic feeling, I think. So anyway, end of commercial. The question for us is how can we make these classes? What we're trying to build is an institution in lieu of a satisfactory educational bureaucracy, organization, educational philosophy, because I think as I'm sorry, I forget your name. Sean was saying, we have a kind of way of thinking about education that very much lends itself to this idea of the education bubble, right? Which is really, for me, just a wage assurance policy, right? You pay a certain amount, you spend a certain amount of time, and you can assure yourself a certain wage in the future. But I mean, as someone who studies education, what it is, that's not education. That's something else. And what we're trying to do, I think, is figure out ways of teaching, ways of learning, what to teach, how to teach, to figure out how to create something else, create a new space.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Please.
So one of the issues that I felt like so we used to do that regularly in November, and then we started for the last month. So now what I'm finding is each class is repeating what we talked about last week. And so I'm feeling like I'm all for that, and I'm all for economic literacy and having everybody take over the economy and not have it be relegated to the domain of experts and technical kind of economists. I think everybody can be an economist and everybody does economics in their everyday life, but I'm feeling like we're talking about the same stuff has been coming up every week. So I kind of want to know how are we gonna make this conversation grow from week to week?
You're talking about creating something new, but this new thing is kind of separate from everything that already exists and that people are filing through every single day, and that children, I'm hearing this conversation being spoken of in reference to education that we choose more, like college and things we choose to pay for, but there's still this whole prerequisite to that starts when we're really young. And that education system has a lot of holes and problems in it too. And I think what needs to be, I don't know, I'm just saying it, what I work in a school that's for behavioral modification, kind of. It takes kids out of, it's the place where they send the kids that can't go to real school because they're bad or something, and it's horrible. And the only reason I stay is because it's horrible. I feel bad leaving them, but it's this place where teaching isn't, it's kind of training for jail. It's teaching people to just do what they're told and not really ask questions, and they get taken to the 17-year-olds get taken to the back room, and this is a real place that kids are going through every day. And then just the regular schools, elementary school, has that in it, that behavioral modification kind of line out, follow me, which is totally not horizontal, I guess. So that's, kids, education of kids.
Thank you. Please.
I guess to relate to both of these questions.
Speak up.
To relate to both of these questions, I feel that there's this lack of, critical thought on the citizenry, coming from a public schooling when there's this hierarchical structure of a know-it-all teacher and someone with the answer, and you're supposed to go to them. So when you create like a free public space, you're giving that power for critical thought back to the populace. And it's how does that motivate them to come up with a curriculum, something that's more meaningful. So I mean, it's like you're still having that same feeling where people are looking for you for the answers, or looking for you to create the curriculum instead of having the general populace say, this is what we need to know. So I think it's breaking down that structure of a know-it-all, and I look at it as like the raise your hand generation. Like always in need of. I need someone to answer this question for me without being able to construct. You might not know the answer, but you can construct a lesson plan that'll help you get there. And once that becomes the norm, once we realize we have the power to create our own internal way of learning, I think we'll see more of that free school growth. Like I mean, what is political about teaching and learning is, to me, when you come to a need, you need a specific skill set, whatever it may be, how to boil water, possibly like that. Then you'll go forward and you'll learn those movements. Unfortunately, I don't see that in modern compulsory schooling. There's none of that freedom to create.
Kathleen, that's interesting because in horizontal pedagogy we've been experimenting with a lot of different kinds of things that you would teach, like something that's more critical or more theory based, and something that's more of a skill share. And there is this assumption, and I've heard it a couple of times in this circle actually, that you need someone to show you how to boil water. But and I would ask the question that, I mean, who was the first person to boil water and who showed them? So, I mean, that's something that's sort of been nagging at me. It's kind of from the Skillshare things that we've been doing. We did a notebook making session, and the explicator, the skilled person didn't speak the whole time. And we made like 10 notebooks.
I'm not sure I quite get the point, because you can go from boiling water to brain surgery, and somewhere in there has to be a taking of knowledge.
But on a very foundational level I feel like there's an ideological sort of something going on where people really feel like there have to be specialists. Just because we live in such a specialized world at the moment, there's this assumption that is good, that is right.
So I was thinking about that because, sometimes I think there are some subject matters that, we kind of have to provide knowledge or just provide information to somebody else. And so I always think about the politics of that, because almost embedded in that is a hierarchy. I have information and you need information, but how to transform that relationship to make it as horizontal as possible when almost hierarchy is almost built into it. So that's always my question about that. How do we transform that nature?
So with the from boiling water to brain surgery, one thing you can self-teach yourself, but unlike brain surgery, you need a little bit more skill, and I recognize the need for skilled facilitators to learn a process very intricately, and but once you get to that level of wanting to learn how to do brain surgery, you're making that choice. This is what I want to learn. Let me seek out my professors and doctors. Let me organize my time so I could go to the study hall and study and so on and so forth. And that there's a difference between getting to that point. There's a different structure of education from that point on than what is previously installed into the individual. From like pre-K to high school. It's very regimented. Bells are controlling the schedule. There's no time to finish. You really don't get to pick electives within a select bubble. So once you get to that freedom, now you're a different student at that point, I feel. And if we can carry that type of educational responsibility down to the compulsory levels, I wonder what education would look like.
we've got a stack, and Adam's on it next. I just want to make sure for everyone who's just come, we're Horizontal Pedagogy. We're discussing questions of what's political about how we teach, how we learn. If you want to share a thought, just put your hand up, and I'll write you down.
So related to this this idea that you sort of like sometimes need people who are really smart to teach you the skills that you can't just figure out for yourself. I think one of the strange things that gets sold in classrooms is a really crazy notion of time. I mean, it's funny, we have this society where basically like half of us could like just not show up to work for a week and everything would be fine because our material needs are mostly met by people outside of this country. I mean, nevertheless, we can't actually get people to not show up for work for a week, which is strange. But anyway, I mean, I think there's this really crazy idea that like if you don't have all your learning done by the time you're 18 in this country, we've somehow failed you. Like you can't actually spend until you're like much older than that, like sort of taking it slow and figuring stuff out for yourself in a much more horizontal way, because that's somehow like a failure of the society to educate as fast as it could or something like that, which seems really nuts.
Do we have thoughts from others? Yeah.
I think it's.
No, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of not just what is taught, but also what is omitted. Like for example, let's just say that the kind of history I learned in elementary school is not just in like the level, but it's also in the content. It's very different in grade school than it was in college. Like you get very different pictures from stuff like people's history of the United States. I think that's also a note too, because there's some stuff that's very likely deliberately omitted because it doesn't really reflect well on certain people. Like you won't really learn about the Palmer raids and stuff like that in a lot of history courses in grade school. So I think that's also important to note. Is it actually accurate, or actually teaching the facts?
Yeah, it seems like in what you were just saying, there's this very clear difference that we work with a lot between how we teach, what we teach, how we learn, what we learn, and I guess we're kind of focusing on the political tension there. It seemed like before this issue of skill has been really important for us, and we're only kind of coming upon it now. So a lot of times when we've talked to folks who come to our Horizontal Pedagogy workshop, which by the way happens in Union Square every Thursday night at 8 p.m., we have discussions about this kind of stuff. A lot of times this kind of question will come up like brain surgery, or in a less severe case, what about math, right? Like, or how do we teach math? You know, when you have a skill, when there's a right way, when there's a wrong way, it's fine for poetry and the hippy dippy whatever. But when it comes down to facts, you know, like how do you do it? And I'm interested. I have my own thoughts about it. You know, I think you can, but it kind of pushes this kind of nerve. People need the master. You know, they need to. We have a raise our hand culture, I think. And they need someone to, I don't know, be over them maybe to replace. I find this as a teacher. As soon as I kind of remove myself and say, I think you got that, students kind of freak out. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Yeah, please.
I guess for me, shouldn't it be? Isn't that how science? Doesn't science work through experimentation? Doesn't math work through experimentation?
Do you mind saying that and facing the audience?
Sorry. I feel like science and math work through experimentation, through doing. You don't learn math. I don't learn math by seeing a formula. I learn it by doing it. It's just, I feel like that's how science is intended to work. That's how the scientific method works. That's not really how anything else works. It should be easier to learn through trial and error with science and math and facts because they exist, because they are facts.
To relate to the whole math question, I failed math miserably throughout my whole high school career, and I'm an electrician now. And so about 7 years ago, I was going to the community college and just taking some regular math courses to help me with that math. And we formed a good study group. We just met up in the library, and so the teacher was more of like a facilitator. He'd give us a couple problems, we'd work out the techniques, and then the 8 of us would work on the same problems in our own ways, and then discuss how we got to certain answers. And in that environment, with me wanting to learn it, I picked it up and I went, the pre-algebra, calculus, calc 2. Now I forgot it.
Please.
Yeah, just related to that, I went to this class about teaching for sustainability, and then there was one girl from Australia that talked about she's studied to become a teacher in Australia, and she said that when they teach math for like 9 to 10-year-olds, they like have different levels within the same classroom. So the students will sit in small groups and work on a problem, and they will have really different levels, but they won't know that the other people are working on something more difficult than you or less difficult. So it's like trying to put people where they are in their learning curve or whatever, but not really separate them so they feel like, oh, I'm worse than the others. Because like when you have totally different classes, people are like, okay, I'm bad, I'm never going to learn math. But if you do it in the same classroom, they're just working on different problems. It's not like, and it's not just sitting with a book and just like calculating.
Have your peers supporting you.
Yeah.
I also think it's really hard to get rid of the stigma on math and science that it's like not synonymous with like art. I don't know. That's something that I've like been frustrated with. Like that's how I grew up my whole life, and now I recently went to the Natural History Museum and I was like blown away, and I'm like so like regretful that I haven't taken science and math seriously because I felt like it's not creative or it's like not, intellectual. It's pretty bad also.
Do we know why science and math are separate from arts and social sciences?
Well, one reason you can kind of they're distinguished is because math and science operate on axioms, things that are always true, right? Or at least that's the perception, right? Is that math and science are more axiomatic, whereas the categories of art and science, social sciences, by contrast, are relative to, are a little bit more fluid and open, and so people don't think that they can master axiomatic truths when they're not in that or the other way around.
Or does it have a little bit more to do with this?
Absolutely. 100%.
And a little bit more to do with this?
What is that? What is that?
Money science.
What?
Money science.
Oh, money. We had a hand here.
Yeah, I mean that's also like a thing that's helped me. Like in my university, and I'm sure in a lot of universities, like whenever you see political mobilization, it's in arts, and like people that are like not politically mobilized are like really angry that people are politically mobilized, that are in I don't know, math or science or engineering. And that's also, it's weird that that's also a cultural thing, like regardless of the content that you're studying.
Why is that?
I don't know.
That's so interesting. Yeah, no, as you're saying it, it's like it was one of those things that I always felt was true, but until you said it, it wasn't as explicitly clear. Why is that?
It's a historical sort of thing. The mobilization of advancing sciences and technologies to be the biggest and the best nation has a lot to do with it. The amount of money and administration that's put into math and sciences and technology education has a lot to do with it.
I guess the question is like, why is that like does not leave room for world engagement? Like, I don't know. The students that are in math and science right now are also students. Like, they're also facing like tuition hikes, and they're also facing like all of these problems that like people in arts are facing.
I think I'm starting to think about it, and it's those subjects, right, where it's very clear when you're right and wrong. Right, and now I'm thinking about in the classroom, right, and in traditional kind of pedagogical settings. So when we say pedagogy and horizontal pedagogy, we mean like how we're teaching, how we're learning. When I'm in a math classroom, I don't feel like I'm free to think about the world. I don't feel free. I have to pay attention.
2 plus 2 isn't 5.
2 plus 2 is not 5. I have to pay attention to the master. Okay, he's talking there, and then.
That's the weird thing. Math frees you to do so many things. It gives you so many tools. I don't know.
Can we have a show of hands of math and science teachers here? Okay, so when these issues come up, part of this issue seems to be framed around how does the humanities engage the whole person, the whole learner, versus how does science and math engage the whole learner. So I think that if you're talking about a horizontal pedagogy, I can think of all sorts of ways in which a math and science teacher can engage the whole person. The whole learner. and that connects to a political connection and so on and so forth. So I mean, I'd offer it up to anybody who wants to speak.
Yeah, we could, but we have a stack. I'll put myself on the stack to respond to that. What do you want to get to? Go ahead, sir.
Part of what I feel is lacking maybe in this conversation is talking about a little bit about specific students. As we've been talking, I've been putting into my head the students I used to teach who were kindergarten through 5th grade. I can tell that some of you are talking about university students, and there may be some differences here. But when I taught science, I taught it as an art. I taught it as a way of looking at the world, a way of trying to find some kind of a truth. And your way of doing it may be different from your way of doing it. And I would set up sometimes a problem, and kids would work on it in groups, which was also part of my pedagogy, was that it's important to solve problems collectively instead of individually. And we would come up with, a class of 24 kids would say, come up with 8 different ways of solving the same problem. And each way had some advantages and some disadvantages. We need to look at that together. Now, I was the one that set up the situation, but then I would turn it loose to try to solve that problem. And to me, that was very artful. On a more sophisticated level, it seems to me that one of the great arts that humankind has come up with is beginning to ask and beginning to answer in meaningful ways. Where did we come from? Who are we? What are we about? Which is precisely what the humanities have always been trying to address in one way or another. So I think the two are fairly consistent. It's how it's maybe who are the students, what do they need at this particular time? For example, if a student needs to learn about flight because he or she is becoming a pilot, that might require a different kind of pedagogy than somebody who's trying to experiment with gravity, just in general. I want the person who's becoming a pilot really to know a lot about gravity, not through necessarily experimentation. But I want my pilot to know how gravity works and how that reflects on aerodynamics. But I might also enjoy that you experiment with gravity in a whole lot of different ways. Just as we did when we were babies and we took our handful of cereal and looked around and observed what was going on.
So I have myself here. I have a radical proposal. We've been talking somewhat abstractly for the last hour about horizontal pedagogy, ways of teaching and learning. I've recently worked with a professor of mathematics at a community college in the CUNY system who's actually going to come here and teach an occupied algebra course at 12:30 in an hour. And he's come to our horizontal pedagogy meetings, which happen every Thursday at 8 p.m. in Union Square if anyone's interested. He said, come into my classroom and give this a shot. And they were learning about patterns, and I have a proposal for everyone. We have a set of horizontal pedagogy procedures that we've been experimenting with over the last 5 months. How would we feel in terms of a temperature check about trying to do a math problem together horizontally? Is anyone going to leave if we start doing math? Some people.
I'm in.
All right. Are we good? Are we good with this? Okay.
Are you gonna do it, or is the math teacher gonna do it? We have to do this.
Well, I'm just gonna facilitate. I'm not gonna do anything. All right. So I'm gonna put up. Careful. I'm gonna put up a little picture.
Tiffany.
Thank you.
Oh, because I know what's gonna happen later with.
Like everybody else. That's all right. This is my Occupy sweatshirt. Occupied. Everyone see that, more or less? Okay, now we've been experimenting with some procedures, so I'm gonna just kind of slowly walk through them and then explain it as we go along. So we haven't done this. We'll skip the first two, I think, because there's so many of us. We tend to do an intro just to introduce where we are. So right now we're here in May Day at the Horizontal Pedagogy Workshop, and we're from the Occupy University, talking about pedagogy, what's political about how we teach, how we learn. Then we tend to do a check-in, which is just introducing yourself, and we like to ask the question about how you're feeling right now, because we don't talk about feelings in the classroom a lot, and that can really help. So why don't we just take a second? If you could turn to someone that you don't know right now, just exchange names and say whatever, and then I'll bring you back in a minute.